we can get
Okay.
situated and passed out. And then,
All right.
just since
We
we
don't want
don't,
to shake hands again.
yeah, so we don't
Want to shake hands?
I'm sorry. Hi, Madigan. See you. Glad you're here.
Welcome. Did you get some
gotta
dinner?
do this a little soft start since we got presentation like.
Yeah.
You did better than I did.
Yeah. Agreed.
See you again, man.
So we'll welcome back Mr. Matt Olson. Materials passed out here and presentation up, and we'll get rolling.
Separate. Oh, thank you, sir. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, yes, sir.
Well, welcome back, Matt, for your second interview. We look forward to reviewing your 90-day plan. We might have some questions during your presentation, and we might have some questions afterwards. We have about an hour, and we'll get started, so you can go ahead, sir.
Okay, very good. Is it okay just do it here? Do you want me to stand and meander? Is that problematic?
Wherever you
You're
feel.
fine.
Okay, I can see, you guys can see in both spaces here. I was wondering how the logistics of that were gonna work. I'll just hang out here then, that would be fine. So thank you very much, board members, for inviting me back. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, audience members, everyone, for taking your time today. I gotta say, it's been an amazing day, and I'm really excited to be here. Having had the chance to go around and meet some really incredible people. Talk more about that a little bit later. But I wanted to just take a moment and present transition plan for today here. So as requested. I put two quotes up on this opening slide with intention. Gentleman by the name of Simon Sinek, some of you may be familiar with him. He is my leadership aspiration. He's a really just amazing leadership guru, understands, is a student of leadership. These two quotes spoke to me a little bit when trying to come up with how to describe this. And I want to start with that first quote. Effective communication starts with listening. I had a really interesting interaction today that I wanted to harken back to. One of the staff members that I met, I said, hey, what questions might you have for me, right? And because I was asking questions and said, hey, I'm the one on task here. Take me to task. What would you like to know? And she said, well, could you tell me about your 90-day plan? Come tonight, there'll be a 20-minute interlude. She's like, I can't be there tonight. I said, okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you the one-word version, listening. That really is the essence. If I had to strip it down and you said, give me one slide and one word, that's what I would say. It really is about coming in and being a listener, a careful listener. And so I really believe that that quote grabs that. Effective communication starts with listening. The second one, I think it makes sense to talk about how to show up as a brand new leader. So I don't want to show up to prove. That's not who I am as a leader, to show up to say, I'm the expert, I'm the person that's going to get things done. It's just not kind of my character. But I do show up to improve. And I think that's been something that's been really exciting to me as I've kind of gone through this process with you all, with the community, is the focus on improvement here and the interest in going to the next level, even in a place that's doing really well, which I think is really quite inspiring and really what's drawing me in. So that's kind of the beginning here. And so I want to start off, before I get into the kind of crux of this, I'm going to talk a little bit about some initial, just how I'm setting up this plan. I want to get into kind of the types of conversations and the types of dialogue that I want to get into with the plan, and then a little bit of how it will go about, how it will execute across the 90 days. So to start off, I just wanted to talk about some guiding principles. I really am a person who believes any time that you embark on something like this, you should have clear outcomes. and transparency, so people understand exactly what it is I'm trying to do. And so on the outcome sheet, there's really two primary outcomes. They're actually on the bottom of that first box. The first and foremost one is to build relationships and rapport. Obviously, this is a change, right? So Mark's been here a long time. Coming in is a change, so I want to really work to build those relationships and rapport with people. That's outcome one. The secondary outcome that I'm also striving to achieve is really about gathering data. And the gathering data is both for my personal use, just to get to better know the community that I'm coming into, but also for the use of the board and our leadership team to think about what is our current state and where it is that we want to go. What is the community saying? What are the staff saying? So those are really the primary outcomes. The through line with those outcomes, though, are these three statements. When I'm building relationship and rapport, I'm really trying to get to these three things. You're safe with me, you can trust me, and you can count on me. Safety, trust, and accountability with everything that I do. Those are actually, it's not my original thoughts. These are basic human needs that are grounded in some really good research. When people feel those things, they're able to engage in a place of safety and in a place of confidence. So that's what I'm looking to try to build. In terms of how, the tools and training in the middle, I touched on this a bit in the first interview. I really lean deeply into cognitive coaching. I'm a fully trained cognitive coaching disciple, and really believe in the power of these things, pausing, paraphrasing, and asking mediating questions. So when I'm coming into a space to try to start to build that rapport and build that relationship, I'm doing it intentionally with pausing, listening, giving back people's words to ensure understanding, not just repeating, but paraphrasing carefully, and asking questions that are mediating in nature, not simple yes and no. I'm going to be asking things that have some open-ended nature to them, giving people choice and thought as to what they think, where they think we are, and where they think we need to go. And I also lean into the process communication model, or PCM. And again, I think I touched on this briefly in the first interview. It's a science of communication that understands humans to have 6 primary channels that we communicate in. And I won't belabor the details of it, but essentially, as a communicator, my goal is to modulate and meet people where they are. So I, as the leader, have that responsibility to meet them because they're going to communicate in a way that's most comfortable to them. I can access any of those 6 if I'm in a good space, so I'm going to make sure to meet people where they are. And then finally, I think it's important to just understand a little bit of the backdrop and a few just key points going into those 90 days. First being, summertime is not off time. That is a public misconception about schools often, that everyone kind of goes home in June through August, and then we all show up on the first day of school. Anyone who works in the schools knows that that's not the case. It's actually a very busy time. Our finance group will be doing audit. Our teachers are doing professional development, preparation, strategic planning. So mindfulness of that ongoing work is going to be really important for me. I'm going to approach this in such a way that it is my intention to not come in as kind of that new boss and say, hey, meet with me here in this space, and interrupt people's work and expect them to just speak. It really is about being mindful of people's work and trying to get in a place and meet them where they are. Again, I think that's how I approach leadership in general. I want to be very transparent about what I'm doing and clear. I think that's really important. And finally, I think one of the things that is a benefit for me is coming into this space as someone who's had a fair amount of superintendent experience and working in the ISD. I've created a really strong network across the state. I know a lot of people in this space and have a lot of the kind of external relationships that you need as a superintendent. So my focus can really be dialed in internally. And that would be my intention, is to really dial into the community, the staff, and really put that attention where it needs to be. It's not as critical for me to go out and make relationships with colleagues at MASA, the Michigan Association of School Administrators. I've been there, I know that space. So the focus will really be where it needs to be. So I also want to just put this to set a stage. There's a book that I read recently. Peter Block is the author. It's called Community, the Structure of Belonging. I've used this now in multiple spaces. These are 6 conversation types that Peter Block lays out. I've used this as stems for really high quality dialogue. So in Peter Block's work, he believes that to build community, these are the conversations that can provide those building blocks. So having a conversation with invitation, asking things like what's going well, what might need improvement, that's one type of conversation to have, okay? Giving room for people to talk about their level of commitment to the work and so forth. Those are all important. I would focus in on number 4. I think this one's important, and it sounds negative off the front, but let me explain. Allowing for dissent, creating a space where dissent can occur, allowing people to say what doubts or reservations might you have. I think it's really important as a leader coming into a space to give people the opportunity to say no and yes. Because if you only give people the opportunity to say yes, there is no authentic yes at that point. If you don't give people the opportunity to say no, there is no authentic yes, right? So it's really creating that space where dissent is okay and encouraged, invitation, possibility, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. These are the stems that are in my mind when I'm walking into the conversations I'm about to talk about. So, the first category of dialogue that I would approach is more one-on-one small group. So my hope would be, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the sequence. This is, but early on in the sequence, I'd want to make sure that I'm having one-on-one conversations with each of you, okay? One-on-one conversations with each member of my cabinet and leadership team. One-on-one conversations with association leaders. Started some of these today, right? And so I really appreciate that. Building and program leaders, central office leaders and support staff. These are places where I know to start. What I fully anticipate will happen, as I've gone through this before in my first superintendency, those conversations tend to lead to others. Because, I'll be talking with Terry, and Terry's like, hey, have you talked to fill in the blank? I think this is a person that would be really important for you to get to know. And that's how it expands, and that's how the network builds, and that's how the relationships build, and how you really help ingratiate yourself into the community right out of the gate and start following those rabbit holes, right? So that's one. These, I'm not going and saying, okay, let's start with an invitation conversation, and then let's move into a possibilities conversation. That's not, it's a conversation, it's a dialogue, it's unstructured, it's informal, that's kind of the start. Meet and greet opportunities is kind of my second category of what I would term opportunities for these conversations. They can have some structure, maybe not very much, maybe more. It depends on the nature, but I would look for ways to get opportunities to get into things like maybe giving a short presentation or having an opportunity to meet and greet with the local Rotary Club, right? I think I mentioned last time I already talked to Pat McGinnis. I've got my invite, and I fully plan to use that if I'm fortunate enough to move on here. Meeting with the ISD and regional leaders, meeting with civic leaders and so forth. Whether it's they want me to come in and say something about Portage, I can do that. We can talk about what some of these questions might be that they would have, or we can just go in and have something more unstructured and formal. I really kind of let the constituents determine what it is they want. Now this piece, the meeting the teams, I think is the most important on a lot of levels, and also the most important to have a more formal structure, okay? It's really important to me personally, as I really tried to impress on you in the last interview, to be present, visible, and to be with staff and be open and hearing of all of their feedback and reflection. So I would want to be really thoughtful and intentional with the building level principals and building leaders and the building formal and informal leaders about what's the best way to structure those conversations. I come into a staff meeting, what I would not want to do is to go in, the non-example would be to go in, have everyone sit, similar to this, and just start asking a question, asking people to raise their hands. Because what I would get at that point is I would only get a few voices. And I would get the voices that are probably the loudest. And I want to hear those. It's not saying that I don't. I do, but I don't only want to hear those. So what I've done, when I've used this Peter Block community structure of belonging, I've had really great success with coming in with an intentional structure of having some small group conversation and facilitating that as the lead in the space. So having people get in small groups of 3 or 4, giving them the conversation structures and stems and saying, so what's going well right now? And asking them to have a small group conversation and giving them a note taker, something to collect artifacts so we have something in writing, and then asking at the end of each conversation for there to be a report out from the group. My goal in that is really simple. I don't want to hear 3 or 4 voices. I want to hear everyone's voices. So whether I hear that from the group report out or from the note taker, my goal is to make sure to get voice in some way, whether it's actual physical voice or whether it's through the notes. Does that make sense? So that's, the structure is actually meant, sometimes people think structure stifles the conversation. It's the opposite. The structure is meant to enhance the conversation and ensure that everyone's heard. So that's the meeting the team structure, and I recognize there's a lot of folks to meet here. And I'm sure like some of these will be multiple groups, right? Especially in the larger buildings with larger staffs. I absolutely will take the time to do that. So, what does this look like? On my calendar, like on how this is going to play out, what I'd like to have it play out anyway, is I want to think of this in kind of 2 chunks, the first 30 days and the second 60 days. First 30 days is really about building foundations. So it's about having those early conversations, as I said earlier, with all of you, with members of my executive team, with association leadership, really sitting down and having those informal one-on-ones. It's also about getting familiar with documents. I've already tried to start doing that. That's really important. I've done as much as I can do to get into things like your monitoring reports on the board work. Getting into, there's things that I can't get into online, like the emergency operations procedure. We don't want to put those online for very obvious safety reasons, right? But I can't wait 3 months in to know the EOP. Like that's something that I need to get into right away. So things like that, I'll be doing those. And all that time I'll also be scheduling and planning for how do those tendrils look when I'm going out into the community. So things like having some events. I know you all have a workshop structure, right, where you have board workshops scheduled already. I think it'd be really important for us to have a workshop at the front end. Whenever members change, obviously I would be a change, that we have time to work through what do those dynamics look like so that you have expectations of me, I have the right expectations of you, and there's clarity, right? Just making sure that we're all really clear on that. Likewise with the executive team. I use the term executive team building. Talked about like how the executive team retreat. I don't want to give people the idea I'm going to take us all to Vegas and do something like retreaty. That's not the plan. That's not how we do in education. But to really have time and space with those folks. Really pleased to have some of that time today and really look forward to more of it. Really amazing group of people. So that's the kind of the planning aspect of this, thinking about how I'm going to go further. The 60-day piece, the next level target, is to deepen those relationships. It's not as if that is the first and last time I would want to speak with you all one-on-one, right? It would become, I would want to look for a cadence that we would structure so that we have time and space together. So deepen those relationships, hold those scheduled conversations, get to all those buildings, get into those spaces, have the board workshop, have those team events, and then really work on getting that outreach through, like I said earlier, when Terry's going to tell me who I need to talk to, right? Those are going to be those kind of, that's that 60-day, second, 30-day, 60-day. Sorry, I get lost in my own numbers here, but in the kind of latter 2/3 of that space. Okay, so hoping to have that by October 1st. What I do want to emphasize in here, though, is just really put an exclamation point on what I said in the last interview. This is 90 days, and these are things that I want to be doing throughout that time. I want to be making sure I'm visiting classrooms, connecting with employees, and recognizing students. I recognize that this is a large system. It's not easy. I probably will not be able to learn every student's name, but I'm going to die trying. I really do believe like that personal touch is important. I'm going to work on getting to know kids. I'm going to work on getting to know staff so that I can still tell people by name. I think that this is a growing and large city, but it has a small town feel, and that's one of the things that I love about it. I want to honor that by getting to know people in a way that you would in a small town district. And this is not my first 90 days. That's why it says 90 days and beyond. This is how I intend to be a superintendent, not just in the transition period. So, and just to revisit the front end, my outcomes, I'm looking to build relationship and rapport and gather that data. And I just want to emphasize one more time. Let people know they can trust me, they're safe with me, they can count on me. If I do nothing else other than establish those things with as many people as possible, I think that I'm going in the right direction. So I appreciate time and attention, and welcome any questions you might have. In the packet, I should just notice that I gave you, the slides are all on there. I just put kind of a summary page on the front, just so that it's not the exact, but I hope to give you kind of a quick sheet to give you an idea what it looks like.
Should I
Would you like to start at that?
start this time?
Sure.
Okay. Started that time last. Question, what is your decision-making process for district-wide changes such as bringing in new curriculum? How would you go about formulating that change?
So decision-making process, for me, I think it really is first and foremost about two primary things. One is understanding what processes are already in place and policies. What I don't want to do is make up my own policy, my own procedure, and recognize later, oh, the district already has a policy and procedure to deal with. So that's the first piece, is to know what pre-exists that. Then after that, it really is leaning into my team, my leadership team, and having the conversation about, so I want to know about what brought on the question. Right? Why are we, so if their question is, are we bringing in a new curriculum? I want to know what's prompting that. Is this a normal review cycle? Is there a community concern or question? Is it a staff concern or question? Like, I'd want to know more about the why. So whenever I hear that kind of an approach, I always try to get back to, what's the why? What's the reasoning we're having this conversation? And then try to be thoughtful and methodical, while not gumming up the process for the sake of gumming up the process either. It's important that we're responsive in those spaces, but we're thoughtful in our responsiveness. So it's rarely would I make a decision like that independently, if ever. I mean, it really would be something that's why we have expertise in the team. So if there were a curriculum question, bringing the curriculum team in and having conversation about what I just said, what prompted it, where do we go from there, and really leaning into their expertise. And then, you know, if that directly impacts staff, I want to have input from staff. Say, so what is your question? I've been down the path where I've seen things like a curriculum change done with minimal staff input. It doesn't go well, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing where we might buy that new curriculum and it sits in the back on a corner and doesn't get used. Why would it? Because they didn't have any voice in the process and may not trust. So I want to really build that trust and open spaces.
So we have a history in the recent past where there have been discussions about concerns with curriculum, concerns about changes to curriculum, concerns about a variety of things where staff or community have not felt heard. During our initial interview with you, you mentioned people want to be heard. So how would you prioritize this with our teachers, our staff, and our community? Specifically, how would you do that?
So specific to curriculum, or just in, are we talking broadly in general?
In helping people feel heard.
Helping people feel heard. So I think it's not one thing. I wish it was. That would be easier. But I really think it is a culture that is established of what I would consider, I use this term, but I call it fair process. People, in my experience, people tend to be much more understanding of whatever the decisions are if they feel like the process by which the decision got to was fair, was transparent, people were heard, all those things. If people feel that, it's much easier to get to, even if I disagree with the end, I at least felt like the process was fair. So in terms of how I prioritize that, I think fair process is not a one thing, it's a culture. It's a culture of, if people feel like when I go to the principal, they're going to listen to me and hear what I have to say as a teacher, I'll just use that as an example, then, and that principal will actually do something with my concern and then go back to me and tell me how it went. That's a cultural thing. The non-example of that cultural thing would be if I go to my principal and they have the concern and they say I'll take care of it and I never hear back from them again. That creates a non-fair process space. So it's harder to gain trust and such in those spaces. So my goal, priority, would be to really foster a sense of how do we embrace fair process as a district at all levels, at buildings, at the district level, in how we deal with the media, how we deal with communication going out to our community, that it's transparency is what we always strive for. And I had a conversation with Michelle earlier. I always feel bad, like communications always get, people are always like, gosh, the communication could have been better. We work so hard on the communication to try to make it as good as possible. And still sometimes people feel like we fall short. We're never going to be perfect. If people know we're really working and trying and there's evidence of that, and culturally, we're going to have a way easier time dealing with those issues than if there is a sense of decisions are made in smoky rooms in the back by a superintendent who's out of touch. And I've seen cultures like that in both spaces. Obviously, you know where I want to try to get to. That's my goal.
All right, Matt. I'm gonna use an aid. So
Visuals, yeah.
we go back to Good to Great, which is 25 years old, but it's still a classic. And
It holds up.
I want to read the first three sentences. Good is the enemy of great. And that is one of the key reasons why we have so little that becomes great. And then the third sentence is, we don't have great schools principally because we have good schools. And without oversimplifying it, I'd say that's our situation.
Yeah.
Right? It's really good, but I would say as a board, we have been wrestling with, and I think making some good progress on how we better articulate what we mean by great. And hopefully our next leader can help us with that and then help us take it up right a notch, right, to great.
Yes.
So here's the question. Leading a large institution from good to great is really hard.
Yeah.
Right, there's no off-the-shelf plan. But can you offer some thoughts on how you might approach it?
I appreciate the question very much, Bo, and it is a big question. I think leading an organization to great requires imagination. It requires some willingness to take some risks and go in some different directions. And it requires really thoughtful planning on the part of the district and a culture that's going to support that. I know culture is really key in a space like this. I'm forgetting where the reference for this. One of my colleagues could probably answer it, but the culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's not to say strategy is not important. Strategy is critically important. You can have the best strategy in the world, and if the culture is not ready to embrace the strategy, because the culture is not in the space of safety, that's part of why safety was one of those three things that I put out there earlier. it's just not going to go anywhere. I've seen too many examples of this in my career. So in terms of what I would bring as a leader in a space like this, it's really about establishing and building culture so that you can build those the strategies that are going to make the changes. Great conversation earlier with Jeremy out at Haverhill, right? And he was talking about the changes in the building were really exciting, and it's really cool. I mean, Haverhill's going to be amazing. But the thing that's going to make Haverhill great is not the building. It's going to be the practices of the people in the building and how they adjust given the resources that they're being presented with, right? Like, new buildings are important. That's one of the things about Portage that is so exciting to me. This is a community that is clearly investing in schools, in kids, at a level I don't think I have seen anywhere else. I really want to be a part of that because people want more for the next generation of kids. I've been in communities where it's been the opposite. People have said, it was good enough for me. This is a different mentality. And so we have a responsibility. We're doing these things with the physical buildings, making the practices match the physical buildings by taking those into the new century, millennia, what we want to say, is where the rubber meets the road. That's where I think it really comes down to a mind shift on how we coach and work with staff. I think it's people want to do it. Staff, we want to do best by kids. So how do we do that in a way that people are going to be trusting of it and feel like it's a good process, be excited to be a part of it, and help those practices shift alongside this massive investment? I think that's the excitement part. And that, for me, it's about equipping the district from the leadership level all the way on down so that we're all approaching those practices in that way. So my job would be to lead leaders, and those leaders would be to lead those buildings, do the modeling of how we want to shift to take our kids to that next level. Process takes time, but man, the pieces are in place for it. It's exciting. Thank you.
Matt, how do you envision communicating after your 90-day transition plan in terms of what you learned and what your recommended steps forward might be?
So I would want to talk to you guys a little bit about that and see kind of what your thoughts were on this, of course, and get some of your expectations. But really, I think it's, like I said, in this process, it's about gathering data, right? So I would want to find, a way, I would compile that data, compile those things, and try to really distill it down to here's the big takeaways. And we'll want to present that to you all, and then present that to the community. This is what we're seeing. I really believe in operating transparently as much as is possible. My communication will end up being multifaceted. I'll have direct communication with you, the board, of course. I'll have direct communication with the staff through written communication, I would want to work with our communications department on this and think about what that could look like, but I found some success in using video, using kind of short form video to send like video messages out, and likewise to the community. So I want to talk about strategically what that could look like, but I'm open to multiple channels. I want to make sure that it's something that's going to cut through the noise. I don't want to just put out a newsletter and say I communicated and the newsletter doesn't get read enough, or get taken up enough. So I want to be thoughtful about what's working. I want to be asking Michelle, what works? What do you think? And figure out the best way to get that out. I definitely want to make sure that the information I gather gets back. It won't sit here.
Thank you.
Matt, the top priority of our board for the superintendent is student achievement. What do you feel are the essential elements to improving student achievement, and how would you ensure all of those elements are in place and effective?
I appreciate the question, Terry. First of all, I just want to say that I'm really appreciative and buoyed by the fact that that is your priority. Because again, It's really easy to get caught up in the minutia of the superintendent work. I've had many colleagues who I've seen do this, and instructional leadership sometimes takes a backseat. And it's clear that that's not what this board wants. That's not what this community wants. And so, in terms of instructional leadership, and thinking about how to make student achievement the priority, I think that the way that I would approach doing that is really, part of it is in communication and being really clear about where we are and where we want to go. And I think the challenge is that we have to think about, I believe it's important to look at student achievement beyond just test scores, especially standardized test scores that we tend to be judged by. That is not to say that those are not important. They are, because that is what we're judged by in the realm of public opinion. So I'm not here to say they don't matter, but I think that there's got to be multiple metrics, and we've got to really be able to, in a more nuanced way. One of those things that we can celebrate is, how is instruction changing? I would really love to see when Haverhill opens and the staff, Jeremy's staff, is working in this new space, in this new concept, a much more team-focused approach. Celebrating that is worthy when it happens, because that is different. That's not how it looks in most elementary schools. And then we watch for how that affects student achievement, short-term and long-term. As we can measure based on our own assessments. How are they doing on unit assessments? How are they doing on formative assessments? How are the kids, students and humans are complicated. And trying to distill us down to a single unit of measurement is not always helpful in trying to get us across the finish line. So it's paying attention to those little things, celebrating those things, and giving people the time and space to really dial into those practices. I think keeping that at the forefront is not easy. And I think that we have to really model doing that in our conversation and keeping our eyes on the prize. Because that way, I've found, like, if I'm focused in on something other than student achievement, chances are that's going to filter down the organization. So I really have to model it at the front end with you all to make sure that we're holding that expectation at all levels of the organization.
Can you tell us about a time when you responded to a staff member who brought up a controversial subject with students? Can you describe the situation and any actions you might have taken and the outcome?
Yes. So if you're a principal long enough, this happens. Actually, you don't need to be a principal that long. It still happens. Same thing with superintendent. So what I would say is, I'll give you an example. I use him a lot. I had this teacher back when I was a principal in Holly schools. He was a remarkable teacher, second career gentleman. He was, I could count, I could almost set my watch by, I was gonna get 2 to 3 calls a year, like in that building, from someone who's like, what is Mr., and I won't say his name, doing? He said, did this. To which I would listen, understand what happened, I'd say, let me find out a little bit more and I'm gonna get back with you. I would go down to the classroom and have the conversation with Mr. So-and-so, and I'd say, so, and usually before the words came out of my mouth, he was, Matt, I'm really sorry. I should not have said that. I will take care of this. Let me talk to the parent. I'd say, okay, have a conversation with the parent. I'm going to check back, get back with me with what happened, and then I'm going to call the parent back tomorrow. In the time that I was there, that solved the problem. It really was, like, it never, to be clear, this was not something that was ever like, there are things that you can't walk back from, right? This was not those things. This was just, but the thing that made it workable was this gentleman was a remarkable teacher. He really was. And the kids adored him. And the staff, it was worth the trade-off of understanding that sometimes in his zeal, he would go a little too far, knowing that it was never so far enough it was unrecoverable, but it was something that he would be willing to go back and fix. So that's always my first space, is to try to go to the teacher and the parent and see if it can be worked out there. I don't want to insert myself into that space unless I have to. Now, if it's something where the parent's not willing, then I have to change tactic at that point. And then we have to do some restoration, if possible. And if it's something that's obviously not recoverable, that goes into a different conversation. So it really does depend on what was said, but the vast majority of the time, that tends to be what it is. Usually most people are trying to do the right thing, right? And even when something like that happens and a teacher or a staff member says something that's off the cuff, it's not usually with malintent. And so how do you go back and fix that? There's some training that I use in that. I'm restorative practices trained. I use that process. It's actually very, very helpful, having like a restorative circle in that space. I have tools that can help me in that space as well. So I will say that's what I did as a principal. As a superintendent, I think that changes the game a little bit. First off, I don't swoop in with my cape and try to fix every situation. I always try to make sure that it gets solved at the lowest level possible. So it's going back to that building, to that teacher and that principal. I get involved if it gets to the point where the other efforts have failed.
Matt, now that you've had an opportunity to learn more about Portage schools, if you could change one thing to improve student achievement, what would you do tomorrow?
Do I have a magic wand to just poof, like make something happen, or does this have to be realistic?
Your choice.
Okay. You know, that's a really good question, Mary Lou. One thing that I would change. So, I think when it comes to how do you improve a system that's already really good, that's always hard. When I was a principal, it was always harder to evaluate the top teachers as opposed to the newer teachers, or the teachers that were kind of struggling a little bit. How do you tell someone who's really good how to get better? I got better at that over time, and really it was about trying to go to that person and allow them to pull it out of themselves. That's where I got into coaching, right? In a district like this, I think there's not like a big, massive shift that I could just say, make this happen tomorrow. That would be realistic. There's things that we could dream about how education could look completely different, and I would love to have that conversation. But for our purposes, for making it more realistic, I think it really is about tweaking around the edges. The biggest one that I would say is finding ways to make instruction more consistently student-centered as opposed to teacher-centered. That's not to say that it's not happening at all. I think it's happening in a lot of places. I saw some really cool student-centered instruction today happening out in that space. And we can always do better and have more of it. There's still a lot of classrooms everywhere, Portage and everywhere, that still look very similar to that classroom I referenced in my first interview of Horace Mann in the late 1800s, right? That kind of factory model instruction. So like a sage on the stage, use whatever terminology you want, but to make instruction more student-centered. If I could just snap my fingers and make that happen, that'd be great. But I think that's something that we can continually do realistically through this work of constant coaching, mentoring, conversations, and trying to help push to get better constantly. I think that's what we could work on. I'd really love to work on.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
We still have some time for more questions. Does anyone have a question for Matt?
Could you give us an example of a time that you had to make a decision that was not popular among your team, or when collaboration failed? How did you handle it, and what steps did you take?
So specifically on the part of my team, as opposed to like not popular in the community, is that?
Not necessarily. It might be not popular among teachers, or it might be not popular among your executive team. You're telling them, this is not how we're going to do things. We're going to do it this way instead. Just one of those types of things.
Okay.
It could be community-based as well.
So, think on that for a moment here. So, I recall there was I think I talked about it a little bit last time, but the hardest decision I made was when we had to really rethink our communities and really rethink how we structured our school district when I was a superintendent at Benzie Central. And we had to close buildings and go to the community for support. And I think where I'll expand on that answer a little bit was when we were not initially successful, okay? So we held a bond proposal and we took it to the voters and did all of the work. I really put my heart and soul into trying to communicate with the community, trying to make the case for why we needed to do the things that we needed to do. And we lost by 113 votes. And so at that point, what I would say is that there were disjointed feelings about where to go from there, right? There were some that would have said, well, we tried, it didn't work, we just got to go with what we have. Others who were angry and were kind of feeling resentful and saying, you know, why didn't the community support us? I mean, there were all sorts of emotions around this. And the decision that I came to after a lot of reflection and a lot of work with the community, it wasn't universally accepted at the time, was we got to go back. And we've got to keep plugging away at this. And we went back a second time and we're not successful by less votes. We lost that time by 101 votes. I remember these numbers a little too well. And then we went back a third time and we're not successful by 79 votes. We went back a fourth time. We got it. Finally. It was painful, it was arduous, but at least it was long. But what I use that as the example because each time we were going back through this, there was a lot of struggle to get people back on why are we doing this? What's our why? What's our clarity of purpose? And the thing that I really kept impressing on my team, on my staff, and on the community as I was communicating was the needs have not changed. The needs are what they are. So if this wasn't successful, help me understand why, so that we can go back to figure out how we can be successful as a group. And it took a lot of time. It took a lot of effort. And in the end, we were able to rally around a final result that was successful. But it took time and it took a lot of work to get those people that were, like I said, some were angry, some were frustrated, some were happy. To try to get all of those people and those disjoint emotions into what's our actual issue. Let's distill it down to that and let's be successful for kids.
Thanks. So Matt, our vision of Portage Public Schools is to be an exceptional, continuously improving learning culture with high expectations committed to all. We know that not all students have the same support needs.
Yes.
And many need different types of learning or different support needs, be it especially coming from a special ed perspective, IEPs, 504s, et cetera. This is sometimes difficult for parents to navigate and leads to frustration if they are either confused by the process or don't feel that the process is occurring as it's supposed to. How will your leadership assist parents and students with that?
So, to be clear, I want to make sure I'm getting this. How would my leadership help parents feel heard, understood in the process of getting the help that they need?
To understand the process, to successfully get the help that is needed for students to provide them.
So help them navigate even that space to get to what they need for their own kids. So I actually had a parent approach me today in the meet and greet and ask a very similar question about their own child. The question was, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically my child didn't qualify for an IEP, didn't qualify under Section 504, but still struggled. And what would you do? And, you know, of course, having limited data, you know, we talked a little bit about, that's why it's important to have systems. That's why we utilize the multiple tiers of support. I talked a little bit about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. But then I spoke to her directly around, I can't answer this as a superintendent to say like the big system, but I can speak back to my experience as a principal. When I tried to navigate a space like this, when a parent was not navigating, they weren't getting the help that they felt that they needed, you know, it was how do we help that individual child? And so like I use the example with her child. I had a system in my old building where we did a check-in, check-out system with our several different staff members volunteered. So for those kids that were struggling, they would get a assigned check-in, check-out staff member. That person would check in with them 10 minutes before school, and then they'd be let out 10 minutes early from their last class and check out so they could get their materials kind of together for the day, and then at the end of the day say, so what do you need to do tonight? And then the morning, rinse and repeat, right? It was just it was a relatively simple concept, getting at that specific need. So I say that to say when it comes to parents, I think we have to create that culture of listening, right? As a superintendent, I think I have to step back now from the space of being a principal and say, how do we create that culture of making sure that when a parent is struggling with those answers, that we're listening and that we're responsive. And, you know, there are limitations to what we can and can't do, of course. But listening and being responsive and going back to that fair process, making sure that parent understands the process, understands what their rights are, what their child's needs are, from what we see, and so that they're feeling heard and in that space. I think that's, as a superintendent, I've got to find ways to stoke that within my leadership team, right? And make sure that we have clarity of purpose around, if we're going to be an exceptional, continuously improving learning culture committed to all, that means committed to each. In that all are individual kids. We have to think about each individual kid and being responsive to that in that process. It's a culture. I feel like that's more of a cultural answer than a systems answer. Does that help?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Matt, can you offer us your reflections on what we as a board could do to support you and the tension of it at the same time having really high expectations? How would you advise us to walk that line?
So supporting me and holding me accountable.
Yeah. For expectations that
Sure.
might be a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, they should be. I truly, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be flippant, but I mean, what we're doing is too important, right? I mean, been in education for 25 years, and I humbly put forth this is the most important work, is working with our kids. So it is not only reasonable, I support you having high expectations of me. So I think that tension of support is, I think it's important that you are asking me to be very clear in what we are actually doing. Like I've got to do more than just provide platitudes of everything's great, everything's going so well. That's clearly not what you're looking for. I've been getting very clear that this is a district that wants to move forward. It is not content to just sit back and rest in a position of relative prominence in a regional area, right? And so that accountability, I think you all have done a really nice job of putting together a structure to make that happen in the policy governance model. And I think personally, I think there's logic to working within that space to ensure that that's how we know there's communication happening. I think the accountability comes from constant communication. So if you're expecting of me and my team to have ongoing communication with you as to what's really happening on the ground, not just giving you a report that says things are great, but giving you a report that says, here's the data that says why things are great. And probably more importantly, here's the data that shows where things are good, but we want to work on making them great, to your point earlier, Bo. It really is, I think you've got to hold me accountable to that, and the structure's there. So I think that tension is managed through that process, and I go back to what I said in the first interview, that's part of what draws me here. Not all boards and superintendents have that kind of a structural piece in place to help make that happen. And I think that's where sometimes school districts can languish in some level of, I don't want to say mediocrity, but at least can languish and get stuck. The only way you get unstuck is to face what's actually there and strategize on how to move differently.
We have just a few minutes left. Does any board member have one more burning question for Matt? Well, Matt, thank you for all your preparation and for your answers to our questions this evening. Do you have any questions for us?
Yeah, I appreciate that. What I would love to ask is just going into this new academic year. If I'm fortunate enough to be selected, my wondering would be, what would be most important to you, collectively or individually, however you want to approach that, for me to be aware of that needs the most attention first? Like, what are those primary things that are really important to know and start tackling right out of the gate? What's your most compelling priority for the district?
I can share you something that I'm concerned about, and I know Mark, and Kimberly kind of addressed the curriculum issues. And since, I'm sure you don't watch every board meeting, and
Catch a few.
and so you might not be aware that we've had a number of people address the board
Yes.
over the last few months, and emails that we've received regarding curriculum changes in both world language and English language arts. And in my view, we have challenges in regards to transparent communication and authentic collaboration between our curriculum department and our professional teaching faculty. So I'm wondering specifically, how would you address this disconnect?
So, in terms of, like I said, transparency is a big issue, and it's really one that's as much cultural as it is procedural. Like, in some senses, I've seen like your curriculum processes are all in line, so that's good, right? There's clarity, at least in those processes, around this is how we do things. I think it's a matter of, is that enough, right? And clearly, at least for some, it's probably not, right? There's people who are still having concerns and are wanting to know more about the process. So again, going back to fair process, helping people to see the process by which the decisions are made and the why decisions are made will help be the antidote to that. What that looks like, there can be multiple possibilities. Could be trying to invite individuals in, could be about having some conversations in the community. That could be with me, it could be with the curriculum department, could be all together. It can be written communication that goes out. More than likely, in most of these cases, it's multifaceted. It's trying to get to people is more challenging now. Like, you've got to have a multifaceted approach of here's the written communication, here's the superintendent's message, here's the recorded board meeting. You try to do an all-out approach so that there's no doubt left that you are really trying to be open about what that is. And so that's my first steps in that, is really trying to get out there. And for the people who have expressed the concern, inviting them to the table for concerns. We understand.
And just to drill down a little farther, I'm also looking for how you would address the disconnect between the administration building and the faculty in our buildings
Absolutely. So,
in that process.
yep. I think that goes back to my intention of how to operate as a superintendent. I want buildings to know and feel comfortable that people in central office, myself first and foremost, are accessible, right? And so that's myself, that's our executive team, that we're accessible and visible. What I've seen in larger systems, it's really easy to start getting that disconnect when people don't interact, right? It's hard to build trust without interaction, authentic, ongoing interaction. So if there's staff members who are feeling a lack of trust over what's happening at the administration building, the antidote to that is connection, creating that connection intentionally. Whatever that looks like, that can be, it can't just be town halls, but that can be a place to start. And that has to be followed up through authentic human interaction. I think I talked a little bit about that last time too, that, it's kind of like when you're trying to recognize, doing the staff person of the month is important, but not nearly as important as actually being on the ground, talking to those people on an ongoing basis. So we have a job to do if there's a disconnect to start mending that divide through more purposeful and more ongoing interaction. It can't be just a token, hey, I cruised by the office and said hi and I'm going back to my office. It needs to be more authentic, more engaged, more intentional and deep.
Matt, would you like to make a closing statement?
Sure. So, I really just want to thank you all again from the bottom of my heart for this opportunity. I had some ideas on what I wanted to say to close, and honestly, after being present in the district today and meeting people, I feel like I kind of want to throw that out the window and just talk to you. So, I met this amazing young woman today at Portage Northern. I'm sure many of you know her because she seems like she will run this place someday, maybe the world. Grace. So Grace was a really amazing, just an amazing student, really poised, just impressed with her in general. But I was having a conversation with her about the arts. And arts are incredibly close to me and my heart. I come from a family of performers. And so we're singers, we're theater actors, we're musicians. So we were talking about that. She was in that same space, and I asked her, so do you guys, what are your musical performances? What did you do this last year? And she said, Rent. At which point I told her story, I'm like, it's true, I aged out of my role. Like, I've always wanted to play Mark on Broadway, and I'm way too old and bald to play him now, to be a bohemian New Yorker. But the interaction just made me think. I asked her, so who did you play? She said, Mimi, and I'm just like, oh. And it brought to mind a quote. There's a great song in Rent where they're having this conversation. They say, I've got baggage, you've got baggage too. And it goes, I'm looking for baggage that goes with mine. And I say this to say, there is no perfect school district. There is no perfect superintendent, right? I mean, we're all humans. We're all, naturally, we have our foibles. This is an amazing school district. I am just, like I said, still blown away by so much of what I've seen today with Grace, the pure just passion of Clint at the adult ed was incredible. The pure, the honesty and zeal that Jeremy had out at Haverhill. And I was thinking, the people that I met, and what I keep hearing consistently is this interest in innovation, and an interest in taking it to the next level, and an interest in a superintendent who's going to be present. Had an amazing conversation with Kim. I could have had conversation with hours just talking middle school out at Central Middle School with just a remarkable principal. I could go on and on. But I think about that, I'm looking for baggage that goes with mine. That's not to say that, baggage is a bad thing, because we all have it. I feel like I've got the skill set and the experiences that match up so well with what I keep continually hearing from the people in the district, from you all through your profile. You talked about wanting a visible, visionary leader who's actively engaged, proven leadership, proven experience. And what I really want you to be clear on with me, because I recognize one of the things that is going to be one of the biggest question marks, is that I'm not from Portage. And I just want to address that elephant. I come with an outside perspective, which I think can be an advantage, and I think it's something that could be helpful to you. But I have no intention of being an outsider. I approach this job as a lifestyle, and I'm looking for a place where I can be. I'm at a stage of my career where I am not looking for a step, I am looking for an end. Not an end literally like tomorrow, but I mean like this, I'm looking for a last step. That sounded very morbid, I apologize. But I'm looking for a place to really lay down, and this is a pinnacle position. This is not a place that I am looking to say do this and then parlay it into what, like Secretary of Education? I'm not going to do it. This is a pinnacle job in a place. It feels good when you go to a school and say, I really want my kid to go here. And I really was thinking about that today when I was going through those schools. Like, this is a place where I would want my own children to go. So the other thing is, I really want to be here in the long term because that's what people do here. One thing that I've really was clear on was, and people come to Portage and they stay in Portage. Like that is, and people are here generationally. And so that's the kind of community that I think I'm really excited to be a part of. And I think I bring the things that you could really use. So I'm hopeful. Had a great day. I hope to parlay it into lots more. But thank you so much again for the opportunity. It's truly an honor to be here, and I look forward to your decisions.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for coming back a second time and helping us get to know you better. We had some difficult decisions to make, and you'll be hearing from us soon. Thank you very much.
That's my cue, right?